Welcome to Cause Before Symptom, uncovering the real cabal and spiritual forces that are controlling the world. And now, here is your host, James Carner.
Welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. Hey guys, how you doing? Today is March 3rd, 2026, and tonight's episode is all about our Part 31 examination of Micah, the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox, and King James Bible. But before we get into that, I wanted to make an announcement. Nothing serious, just next week from the 11th to the 18th, I'll be gone. So I'm not going to have a show, and I'm going to ask our good friend Urban to come in and fill in for me. Yeah, I'm going to go take a week off and spend some time with family. And it's a long time coming. So that's what I'm going to be doing. That's what I'm going to be doing. I just wanted you guys to know that right up front, just so that you don't get, caught off guard. So tonight, Micah addresses a society where religious observance actually continues outwardly, while injustice quietly becomes policy. Now, worship has not ceased, yet land has been seized, okay? Courts are influenced, and authority is used to protect appetite rather than the vulnerable. Well, it sounds like Israel went right back at it again. Well, this examination places the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox rendering besides the King James to observe whether Micah's warning presents divine judgment as an act of retaliation or as the withdrawal of protection once covenantal alignment is refused. And it seems to happen like all the time. We just don't get it, So special attention will be given to the indictment of rulers, priests, and prophets who maintain ritual while permitting inequity to grow beneath the surface. This is why they wanted a king, so that they can manipulate the king and blame it on the king. That's what it is. And those same forces that used the Jews are the exact same forces that are our leaders today. It's a spiritual force. No joke. So the prophecy concerning the ruler from Bethlehem and the requirement to do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly will be compared to determine whether humility is framed as compliance with obligation or as relational posture before God. Now, the promise of the preserved remnant will also be examined to hear how restoration is described once the consequences of injustice are allowed to unfold. It's going to be an interesting show tonight. Shout out to everybody on the live chat. Rumble, number one warrior is Scorpion. Scorpion, what's going on? He says, hey, y'all, made it home just in time for the show. Oh, glad to have you here, my friend. Thank you, Scorpion, for being here. Number two warrior live on Rumble is Boots Hafner, the Spleaking Sparfer. Did I really say that? I did. I mixed the wording. Spleaking Sparfer. I think that sounds more funny than Sparfer Spleaker. Wait, then Spleaking. That just can't. Oh my God. Sparking a spleef. Spleefing a sparf. I can't do it. Anyway, so that happened. Boots says, welcome everyone. Hello, Pastor James, voice of the Rumble airwaves and creator of Detoxifier, ElitePotion.com. Hello, Warrior family. Glad to see y'all here, and let's help out our host by hitting that thumbs up button. Thank you very much, my friend. Boots is laughing. I'm laughing. That was hilarious, dude. And number three warriors, Robert Gertison saying, hi, y'all. Ready to rumble. Right on, dude. Guys, you guys are always my core family when it comes to this. You guys don't know how much I appreciate you being here. It really, really means that you you have a big heart for God, man. You really want to know God like I do, and that lifts me up. And number 4 warrior is Edged, Damon himself, saying, greetings from Texas. Guys, the gang's all here except for the women. It's all men. No women. Like, where's Surfer Wife? Where's She Lexi? Where's, who else? The Rumble Lady. Where is everybody? Spleeking a sparf. That's what I said, dude. Literally, spleeking a sparf. Robert Gertison caught on. Yeah, keep reminding me of that because that's hilarious. Yeah, what are you out there spleeking a sparf? Huh? Well, if you knew James Carter and Cause for a Symptom, fine. All right, guys, let's get into the scary breaking news, huh? We're all gonna die.
Welcome to Shitty Breaking News with your host, James Carter, offering his shitty opinion.
I kid. Texas GOP Senator Cornyn tries to hold his seat while Democrats Crockett apparently is one or something. I don't know. John Cornyn and Ken Paxton advanced to runoff in Republican primary for the Texas U.S. Senate seat. Well, I got to be honest with you guys, and this really sucks, but you really don't want China in Texas. Okay, that's really what this is about, dude. And Associated Press, they're for China, apparently, because they're like basically calling this the MAGA favorite, Ken Paxton, and longtime Senator John Cornyn. Well, they're heading to the runoff of this Republican Senate primary. So there's 2 other candidates. They've garnered strong national attention. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and State Rep James Tallarico. Okay. Well, Associated Press is Rothschild. Let's just say what it is. Rothschild. And Associated Press and Rothschilds report to Orsini. And whatever happens in Texas, it better be Republican. I hate to say this, but it's true, because if China gets a hold of Texas and can figure out a way to pull crude through Texas with, under the radar like they've been doing with Venezuela and Iran, well, that's just not going to be good. Robert says, China and Texas? I can't imagine the height difference. Oh, my God. I didn't say that. Robert Gertison, check yourself. That was horrible. But funny. Look, blue Democrats, even if they really think they're doing what's right for the progressive country, they are very easy to manipulate when it comes to China and their offers. And they probably, a lot of them, probably don't even realize it. They think that they're, being progressive. Well, China, dude, they perfected how to get the Democrat National Committee to favor them. They perfected it and hate our country. I never thought I'd live in this country at the age of 50 where half of the country hates our country. That it was unfathomable in my heart 20 years ago. I wouldn't think that would be something, but thanks to George Bush and his deal with getting China up and helping a new central bank, yeah, it's inevitable. It's happening. We are in a country where half of our countrymen hate our own country. And that's just terrible. That's terrible. And it's not good for our morale. It's not good for us to, come together and stop the divide and conquer between red and blue. And this is literally what you would call political warfare. And Russia has been doing it to America since the Cold War, this kind of infiltration. And China just picked up the pace after Russia or the Soviet Union collapsed. So China just picked up the pace, and China has a huge foothold in most of our huge Ivy League universities. Now, you could say that's speculation. Well, I'm looking at the way that they behave. Okay, I don't have the documentation that they're like I favor China over America, and I'm trying to get them to take over America. No, they don't. There's no documentation out there like that. You're not going to find it, but you can see it through their fruits. And the Democrat National Committee has gone full commie. Okay, communism. Now, I don't care if we're capitalist or socialist or communist. All of them work if you can keep checks and balances, but that never happens. As we've read throughout all history, through all major either monarchies to democracies to republics to communists to socialists, all of them start off great and then it all falls apart because for some reason, I don't know why, but greed kicks in and power kicks in, and someone who has money and power are able to take over the whole thing. And after that, then it's not for the people anymore. The people don't own everything. It looks like it, it's on paper. But when, like Russia, when they practiced communism, the people did not like it. And if you talk to Russians from that era, they will tell you communism is wicked, and they really regret going through those changes. And hey, that's just how it is. Now, Americans, the only thing that's holding us up and keeping us strong, I gotta say, it's the rednecks. Rednecks, bless you. You are the wonderful, what I could say, the wonderful trap that the enemy just is not focusing on. And it will come down to whoever takes over America has to beat the rednecks. And rednecks, they got nothing to lose. And I think we should breed more rednecks. And I'm being serious. We need the hicks. We need the ones who know how to shoot, aim, kill, just in case. And that means if we have a domestic enemy or a foreign enemy. Well, we've had domestic enemies here. It's China. Trump is right. And I hate to say that. We need to favor Orsini. I don't want to favor Orsini. But if it came to to choose one of the worst, one out of the two evils, I'm saying you don't want China controlling America. Okay, they're not really good to their people. Oh, yeah. Oh, I've seen all the videos. It's like, hi, I'm Gwen, and I live in China, and everything's wonderful. I got my own apartment, and it's huge. Look at all the space I got. Oh, my God, I got hot water. And, oh, I got a job. My job is this. And, oh, people just treat each other so nice here, and it's just wonderful. Yeah, but can you get higher up? Is there any ladder somewhere that can help you get into the political realm so that you can have your opinion be voiced? That's really hard to do in China. In America, it's not, if you are determined, but there are ladders and steps that you can take because anyone in America can run for office. Can you just run for office in China? They say, yes, you can. Yes, you can. They're just as corrupt as America. Let's not go down that road. Don't buy into the hype that everyone in China is happy because they're not, okay? Yeah, they started a middle class. Yeah, they did that on purpose to give the appearance that China is a great country. But if you do the history, you'll find out that they've never been good to their people. Never. And that's just how it's always been, right? Absolute leaders will leader absolutely. Anyway, I went way off on a tangent there. Who gives a crap? These American service members died in the Iran conflict, and they named them. Wow. So they're really putting that out there. The New York Times, New York Times, I'm assuming, either got paid for that headline by the Orsinis or they are working for the Orsinis. That's just my opinion. Live updates. Israel hits Beirut and Tehran as Trump warns Iran of escalated attempts. Well, fine. We're all ready. We all know. Yeah, war. Well, America is going to kick their ass. That's what's going to happen. We, even though the leaders don't believe, we have the American people who have just millions of Christians. And those millions of Christians are praying. And Iran is working for the enemy, the devil, not the people, just the Iranian leaders. And it doesn't work that way, just because Iran leaders are, in a different religion than ours, doesn't mean that they're going to have favor from God, period. I think what's going to happen is this will escalate, but not into something that we all would assume, which would be World War III, which I talked about a few nights ago, or last night. No, a few nights ago. So chill. Who cares? If you are a Christian, you should be grounded in Jesus Christ and not be worried about any of this stuff, okay? Because there will be wars and rumors of wars for the rest of our lives. Sorry, that's just how it is. Apparently, there's a live 2026 Houston election results for Texas Republican and Democrat primary. I don't care. I just hope it's not China, okay? China's gaining. But Orsini's are basically, well, here's the thing. They want to take over the ports, okay? Trump keeps screwing up that part. He should have just came out and opened and said, hey, these ports in these blue states aren't paying their taxes. That's a federal problem. Then go after him. Not the front that they want us to think that's all about protesting ICE. Had nothing to do with that. It's the ports. CIA station in Saudi Arabia capital was hit by a drone attack. Who gives a shit? I don't care about the CIA. I think how they do their work is evil. Secret societies, God says in the Bible. Don't do it. Kristi Noem grilled over Alex Preddy's statement and other. Who gives a shit? Nothing really new except for more war and rumors of wars. All right. We're going to go to a quick commercial. When we come back, tonight we're going to be talking about part 31 of our examination of Micah between the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox canon and the King James. Stick around.
Why do 75% of people feel exhausted all the time? The answer might surprise you. In the 1920s, Standard Oil decided to dive into medicine. They pushed synthetic petroleum into our drugs. Sure, it masked symptoms, but it wrecked our guts. Our good bacteria, which fight off parasites and heavy metals, got wiped out by crude oil. But here's the good news. We can fix this by going back to nature. Introducing Elite Potion, the world's top detox program. It restores your good bacteria by removing toxic threats like aluminum, strontium, barium, and parasites. Imagine feeling energized and alive again. They said there couldn't be a pill that did it all. We invented it. Visit elitepotion.com and reclaim your health from synthetic pharmaceuticals. Your body will thank you.
I'll give you $10,000 if you can find just one person who's never filed a tax return.
I'll give you $10,000 if you can find just one person who's never filed a tax return.
Have you ever filed a tax return? Yes.
Nobody. Not one. It starts at 16. That first job, that first form. The moment they became a taxpayer. Every April 15th, millions keep signing the same contract, thinking it's the law. But it isn't the law that binds them. It's the signature. 98% of Americans never owed it. Learn more at unincorporatedassociations.com.
All right, we're back. And tonight's all about Micah, the book of Micah, however you want to pronounce it. So, Philip Del Piano, I thought Philip has been listening to this broadcast for a while, but Philip says, who are the Orsinis? So I texted you guys during the break saying, you guys want to help Philip here on that one? Yeah, fill him in on who the Orsini family is. We're talking about the Gray Pope. I'll let Boots answer that for you. Boots knows what's going on. All right, so part 31 of our examination of the book of Micah between the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox canon and the King James. Now, there are moments in a nation's life when worship continues without interruption, yet justice begins to disappear from the streets. The songs of the people are sung still, and the offerings are still brought forward. Now, the calendar of observance remains intact, yet behind the appearance of faithfulness, homes are quietly being taken. Sounds like America. Inheritance are redistributed through influence. Oh, America? Man. And authority begins to function as insulation for appetite rather than protection for the vulnerable. You see, 1st and 2nd Kings, and I've said this many times on this show, it gives us a clear picture of how many kings did right before God out of 32. And only 2 kings out of 32 did what was right, meaning they didn't take the people's homes, didn't take their inheritance, didn't take them by taxing them to death. Well, that is what the Jews continue to do through the desert, after the desert, and so forth. They just can't seem to stop usury. Period. And there's no protection for the vulnerable. Now, Micah does not enter a people who have abandoned God by name. He speaks to those who continue to claim him, Jehovah, in public while permitting imbalance in practice. Now, this prophecy does not open with spectacle. It opens with a summons. The land itself is called to listen as a controversy is brought forward. Not between strangers, but within a covenant relationship already established by God and agreed to by a people. A covenant, an agreement. You be good, you get blessed. You steal from others, your shit gets taken. That's pretty much it. And it's not the God, the one that's doing it. It's Satan going, when can I go? When can I go? All right, go ahead, steal their stuff. The language that follows will describe rulers who no longer recognize their responsibility to guard equity. Prophets who shape their speech according to provision. Tithes. And priests who mediate according to advantage. Well, you can judge by their fruits. Look at all of those, all throughout the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and all the way up until now, even in the 70s. Those pastors who would do telethons to raise money. Now, the examination tonight will allow both the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox and the King James renderings to speak directly, so the tone here of that summons can be heard without commentary first. Now, Micah's testimony moves between exposure and promise without dissolving either. And the indictment of those who construct stability through quiet dispossession is placed beside the assurance that a remnant will be preserved. The warning that trust may erode within the household is spoken alongside the future appearance of a ruler whose origin is traced to Bethlehem, meaning the book of Micah predicts Jesus. It's all throughout the Old Testament, if you're paying attention. That's prophecy. And prophecy came true because it has been well documented that Jesus did show up. Now, this comparison will allow you guys to hear whether justice is presented as imposed penalty or as the permitted consequence of imbalance once humility is no longer chosen. And since the book of Micah pretty much is dead on when it comes to the Ethiopian verbiage and the King James, we would waste time just reading the same verse over and over again, or twice. So Micah is pretty close. Maybe the next one we do, we'll be examining again via the strange tone and words. But for this book, which is a small book, it's not needed. Now, the promise that follows, well, let's go back. The requirement to do justly love, mercy, and walk humbly, stands at the center of Micah's testimony. The words will now be aligned across both canons to observe whether humility is rendered as ritual, obligation, or a relational posture. Let's take a step back here. Philip says, the Vatican, so I thought I'll do a deep dive. Philip, I did the deep dive. You can use my research. Just type in ORSINI. And if you type in Orsini and Breakspear, you're going to have a blast going through all my articles. So the promise that follows will be examined with the same care. As gathering and restoration are spoken into a future that appears impossible from the present vantage, the language itself will determine how judgment and mercy are held together within the covenant witness of Micah. Now, Micah, don't get on me for pronunciation. I'm just saying, people, when you have to validate yourself to correct me on my errors, you have the problem, not me. Okay, I'm well aware that I make mistakes, but I've had a lot of people come on, or not on here, like on my show live, but send me messages. Will you pronounce this wrong? Or will you just? It's like none of that matters. Okay, it's my heart. My heart. My heart is to do good. And hey, man, I would need a whole team to get me to be up here and be perfect for you guys every time. I really would, but I'm not, and I don't want to, and I'm not interested in being perfect, because that, when you try to be perfect, that leads you straight to hell. It does. Now, the language itself will determine how judgment and mercy are held together within the covenant witness of Micah. Now, Micah opens not with a declaration of war, but with a summons to witness. Now, the hills, the mountains, and the enduring foundations of the earth are called to listen as a controversy is brought forward. Something happened. Oh no, everyone's getting together and listening. Ooh, everyone loves a good controversy, don't they? That's why people read, fiction novels. That's why people love murder mysteries. That's why your spouse is always watching those how-to murder shows. Doesn't freak out your husband though. Nope, not when you're always watching the shows on how to murder your husband. Now, the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox rendering, the canon that we've been studying for the past years almost. Well, its rendering presents this opening as a formal hearing, where creation itself is positioned as the record of a relationship that's already been established. And the King James similarly calls the mountains to hear the Lord's controversy, framing the moment not as a sudden eruption, but as a legal proceeding grounded in covenantal memory. So they're both kind of saying the same. But again, the tone of the King James is more formal, old, while the modern English rendering of the Ge'ez to Amharic to modern English makes it a little bit easier to understand. But it's a legal proceeding. And they're both grounded in covenantal memory. Meaning, do you guys remember the old 10 Commandments? Can we go back to that? Do you know what to go back to? Okay. Stop stealing. That means usury. That means borrowing, lending money with interest, printing money with nothing to back it up. Usury. Stop killing your neighbor. To hold on to keep your money. I mean, it's so basic. The 10 Commandments, they really are, that if you are really breaking them, and life isn't about following the 10 Commandments anymore. Jesus put an end to all of that because he knew we couldn't even follow 10. So it's like Jesus came, Jesus came to be murdered so that his blood could pay for all of eternity, to pay for the entire world. That's what I believe. And I lost my train of thought. Yep, that happens. It was the dancing banana. I blame Damon. Every time he does those, it gets me hypnotized. I'm just kidding, guys. It's all good. But this is all about courtroom, okay? Really, the Ethiopian has helped us understand that the entire thing is about a court system, and we must enter God's court in order to stop the devil from taking advantage of us. So in the Ethiopian rendering, the call for the earth to attend carries the tone of a courtroom rather than a battlefield. Now, the emphasis rests on testimony, and the land is not being asked to suffer judgment, but to observe it. And this positions the coming words within the structure of agreement rather than accusation alone. The King James echoes this structure by describing the Lord as having a controversy with his people, indicating that what follows arises from a prior bond rather than an external imposition. So both of the renderings do present the relationship between God and Israel as one in which expectation has already been defined. The summons does not introduce new terms, it recalls existing ones. Okay? The controversy, therefore, emerges not from unpredictability, but from deviation, from a covenant, from an agreement. Stop screwing your people over. So the Ethiopian phrasing leans toward remembrance. Remember the 10 Commandments? Can you remember those? Oh, yeah, I know. I lost my train of thought. I was going to say that Jesus came to not only just spill the blood and forgive us all. We're forgiven under his blood, period. But to... I was there and then I dropped it. Come on, Lord. Why are you stopping me from this simple little thing here? This is so simple. Not only just to be set right before God through Jesus, but he literally came to... Oh my God, it'll come back to me again. And then I'll have to stop the program. Now, the controversy, therefore, emerges not from unpredictability, but from deviation. Deviation from a covenant. The agreement. Okay? Okay. Oh, yeah, here it is again. Jesus came and gave us one final commandment above all. Okay? When you say above all, my interpretation is, look, all the commandments I gave you before, throw them out the door. Do this one. This one. Love God with all your heart, mind, body, soul, and spirit, and love your neighbor the same way. Okay? That's the new law. Okay? People who practice usury and all that other stuff, that's on them, not you. Okay? You, as a Christian, you should not practice that. Okay? Only because if you're loving your neighbor, usury doesn't feel good in your heart. When you have the Holy Ghost inside of you, usury doesn't feel good. You feel bad because that's the Holy Ghost inside of you showing you what the word says. Now, God gave us the 10 Commandments, and he did it so that he could prove to us that we couldn't even do that. Yeah, more dancing bananas, please. Please, because they're gone now, Damon. And these dancing bananas, they're emojis at these dancing bananas. And my audience has been throwing these out there, just cracking up, playing around with these dancing bananas, and they have fun. And I enjoy it too. And you guys are funny, and I love it. So it's all about loving your neighbor, because if you loved your neighbor, you would not kill them, okay? You wouldn't steal from them, okay? You wouldn't lend them money with interest. You wouldn't. You just give them money, okay? You would honor their mother and their father. You would honor them, right? You wouldn't try to get what they have because you don't have it, okay? That's covenant. That's covetousness. and you wouldn't lie to them, you wouldn't steal from them, and you wouldn't worship them either. They would just be people that you love. There they are, the dancing bananas and the psychedelic hearts. You guys are funny. Okay, so now, do you have that understood? Okay, if you just follow Jesus's last commandment above all, then all 10 commandments would be followed through your heart because you're loving your neighbor. Okay, does that make sense? Isn't that so simple that a caveman can do it? Yeah. Well, the Ethiopian phrasing leans towards remembrance, the covenant. Remember, Jesus hasn't come yet for us to, write the law in our heart. But they got to remember back to the 10 Commandments. Now, while the King James preserves the legal tone of dispute, which it does, it's legal and it's tonal, but both, the opening establishes that what is about to unfold concerns alignment rather than abandonment. They got to get back in line with God again. Now, and this is where God has a problem with free will, because we'll follow your stuff for a while, but, we just can't help it. We want what we can't have. That's in our nature. Now, the question that follows is not directed toward ignorance, but toward amnesia. They forgot. Now, the people are asked what has been done to weary them, and where burden has replaced mercy. Well, it's in their leaders. And this inquiry appears in both canons as an appeal rather than a threat, right? The Ethiopian wording carries the cadence of reflection, while the King James frames it as defense offered before consequences permitted to proceed. So in either case, the emphasis remains on recognition before the response. And historical acts of deliverance are then recalled. They start, bringing up the past and trying to find out why are we not being blessed right now? Now, the liberation from Egypt and the guidance through the wilderness are presented as evidence of fidelity already demonstrated, meaning you forgot to read your Bible. You guys are being afflicted because you're not reading your word. You forgot. And the Ethiopian text names these movements as acts of covenant care, meaning you're not even going back to school to learn this shit. It's so easy. Just 10 commandments. You forgot those, all right? While the King James similarly recounts redemption as the basis for present expectation. Now, the controversy therefore unfolds within a narrative of provision rather than neglect. By invoking past intervention, the opening segment situates justice within memory, and the summons to the mountains become a call to remember what has already been received. Now, this prevents the coming judgment from appearing arbitrary. And the Ethiopian rendering frames this remembrance as testimony offered by creation itself. So while the King James preserves the formal tone of dispute before witnesses, both actually invite reflection before consequences. Now, the covenant lawsuit therefore begins with hearing rather than striking. The land is asked to listen. The people are asked to recall. Go look up history. And the relationship is brought into view before imbalance is addressed. Now, the examination will continue by placing these renderings side by side so that you guys can hear whether divine response is described as retaliation or as the lifting of restraint once alignment is refused. So Micah's testimony turns toward those entrusted with governance. That's the leaders. The Ethiopian Tewahedo rendering speaks of rulers who are expected to know justice, yet move in opposition to it, reversing their responsibility by favoring harm over protection. Now, the King James similarly addresses the heads of Jacob and the princes of Israel, asking whether it is not their place to understand judgment. Well, in both, leadership is not condemned for ignorance, but for departure from what has already been entrusted to them. They're holding their leaders accountable now. Okay, something that we're not doing in America, all right? We're watching them do all of these Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, examinations, and and all of that's a show. That's just a show to make you feel like they're actually doing something. They're not. There's no legal paperwork going after any of these people. None. So where's the outrage? There's none. So the imagery that follows is very stark here. The Ethiopian wording presents authority as consuming the very people it was meant to shelter, describing an inversion, which Satan does, in which guardianship becomes extraction. And the King James mirrors this inversion by speaking of those who hate the good and love the evil, portraying a condition where moral recognition has not disappeared, but has deliberately been exchanged. So leadership remains aware of justice even as it abandons it. So they're doing it on purpose. Now, descriptions of violence are then introduced through metaphor drawn by daily life. The Ethiopian rendering portrays the stripping away of provision as though flesh were taken from bone, emphasizing the lived experience of dispossession. Now, the King James employs similar language, depicting the removal of skin and breaking the structure as an image of administrative harm rather than spontaneous brutality. So the harm described is not incidental, it's procedural. And both translations present this consumption as systemic rather than isolated. The people are not devoured in sudden chaos, but through decisions that appear orderly from within institutional structures. Now, the Ethiopian phrasing leans toward the quiet normalization of imbalance, while the King James preserves the legal gravity of leaders who dismantle the framework that they were assigned to maintain. So when the moment of distress arrives, the testimony states that appeal will be made upward. The Ethiopian rendering describes a turning toward God after imbalance has matured, while the King James similarly records the cry that will follow the experience of consequence. But in both, the response is delayed until harm has already taken form, suggesting that intervention has not been absent, but permitted. Okay, silence then becomes part of the judgment, and the Ethiopian wording frames the absence of answer as the lifting of prior covering, while the King James speaks of the Lord hiding his face in response to deeds already performed. But neither presents silence as indifference, both situated within a sequence where leadership has first withdrawn its protection from the people. So the examination here of these renderings places responsibility within recognition rather than surprise. Authority has not been overtaken by confusion. It has moved in opposition to its own charge. And the devouring described in Micah, therefore arises from posture before it becomes experience, as governance exchanges justice for appetite and protection for gain. So Micah's attention shifts from civic rulers to those entrusted with spiritual speech. The Ethiopian Tewahedo addresses prophets who guide the people according to provision received, shaping their message in response to what is placed into their hands. The King James similarly speaks of prophets who make the people err, declaring peace when they are fed and preparing conflict when provision is withheld. But in both, mediation is shown to have been and become transactional. So the Ethiopian wording presents prophecy as a function that has been redirected from testimony toward maintenance. Speech that once warned is now calibrated. The King James preserves this redirection by describing declarations that change according to appetite, suggesting that the content of revelation has been adjusted to sustain advantage rather than alignment. And the issue is not silence alone, but it's distortion. So as mediation becomes influenced by exchange, consequence begins to take form in the realm of perception. The Ethiopian rendering speaks of darkness covering the seers, portraying the condition in which sight is no longer granted. And the King James echoes this by declaring that night will come upon the prophets so that they shall not have vision. And in both, the loss of clarity follows the compromise of speech. This is something we need to think about today. Do we have seers who can, foretell what's gonna happen? We have many people coming on here, especially on TikTok, saying, "Thus saith the Lord," but are they really? Are they accurate? I'm seeing just like all of the non-prophets out there, they're 10% accurate, and the quatrains are 3,000 prophecies, and only 10% come true, which is pretty much, a guesstimate reality. I can write 3,000 quatrains and 10% will come true. That's just the numbers. Ed says, would you find people? Would you please hit that likey button for James? Would I find people? I don't know how to find people on Rumble, but yeah, guys, please hit the like button. Yeah, I hit the like button. Oh, there's 7. Okay, all right, great. 7's good. I'd rather see 20 because there's 20 people watching this, but what do I know? Okay, so the removal of answer is then introduced here. Okay. And the Ethiopian phrasing describes the sun setting upon those who once spoke guidance, while the King James states that the day shall be dark over them. Revelation does not seize arbitrarily. It withdraws where mediation has been bent toward gain. So silence becomes aligned with posture rather than imposed without cause. And then shame is presented as the public recognition of private compromise. The Ethiopian rendering portrays those who once interpreted as covering their lips in recognition of absence, while the King James similarly speaks of seers being ashamed and diviners confounded. So the covering of the mouth reflects not humility, but the recognition that access has been lost. So nobody's able to get prophecy or see in the future, whether good or bad. Now, in contrast, Micah speaks of his own posture. The Ethiopian wording presents strength derived from alignment with the Spirit, while the King James likewise records that he is full of power by the Spirit of the Lord to declare transgression. So the distinction really rests not in personality, but in source. Speech grounded in alignment remains clear, even when others are darkened. Now, this presents mediation as susceptible to influence when posture shifts from testimony toward maintenance. Now, prophetic authority that adjusts itself for provision becomes unable to perceive when correction is required. And the comparison allows the audience, you guys, to hear whether the loss of vision is described as imposed punishment or as the permitted absence that follows compromised speech. The loss is not God pulling it away. The loss is God lifting his hand off from protecting them. And the devil can come in and do what they want. That's all it is. And we also, if we're remembering, and this is something to really, really understand, guys, is that God has already warned them. They're getting to the point where now they're going to be judged. And so we've been learning that God takes a while to judge the people. It's not instantaneous right then, right when they're, presenting the problem to their leaders. Now the leaders are going to get the warning from God, and then God is going to punish at a later time. So that's how we've seen it. God can sometimes take 500 years to punish them for something they did 500 years ago. So that's important to understand. And the King James, in its tone and its Old English wording, makes it like everything's instant, but it's not. And that's something really, really, really important to understand about God. Slow to wrath, slow to anger, slow to punishment, slow to all of that. And I do believe that the Jews take advantage of that throughout all of the Old Testament. So they're testing God. And it's not the people, it's their leaders. It's those with the riches and the money. It's those that really don't worship God, but worship Baal and Moloch. Now, Micah returns to the public institutions that structure daily life. And the Ethiopian, its rendering addresses heads who judge according to advantage, and priests who instruct for compensation, and prophets who divine for payment. Now, the King James similarly names rulers who judge for reward, priests who teach for hire, and prophets who divine for money. But in both, governance and mediation are shown to have adopted exchange as their organizing principle. Corruption. Now, the construction of stability is then described through unsettling language. The Ethiopian wording portrays Zion as being established through violence and Jerusalem through inequity, suggesting that visible order has been achieved through hidden imbalance. Well, the King James mirrors this testimony by stating that Zion is built with blood and Jerusalem with iniquity. So the structures appear intact, yet their foundation carries the weight of what has been taken. So despite all this, confidence remains publicly declared. The Ethiopian presents leaders who lean upon the Lord while continuing to say that no harm shall come, framing assurance as a statement detached from posture. Now, the King James, it echoes this condition by describing those who trust in the presence of the Lord as protection while their practices contradict the covenant that they invoke. Now, this reliance is not depicted as faithfulness, but as insulation. The Ethiopian phrases lean toward the presumption that ritual association guarantees stability regardless of conduct. Well, you can sacrifice all you want. If your leaders are stealing from the people, you outwardly look like you're holy, but inwardly you're just a dick. Now, the King James similarly presents an appeal to divine proximity that is voiced without alignment, and protection is assumed even where justice has been exchanged for advantage. So consequences then introduced as a failure, unfolding rather than an immediate strike. And then the Ethiopian describes the land becoming open ground, while the King James states that Zion shall be plowed as a field, and Jerusalem shall become heaps. But the dismantling that follows is presented not as sudden intrusion, but as the permitted exposure of what has been quietly constructed. So the removal of structure corresponds with the removal of covering. The Ethiopian text portrays the mountain of the house as becoming like the heights of the forest, while the King James uses similar imagery to describe what remains once protection has been lifted. So the sacred space does not fall within cause or without cause. It reflects the posture that has been sustained within it. So this segment, it places institutional confidence beside foundational imbalance. And the testimony of both renderings invite you guys to hear whether destruction is framed as imposed penalty or as the visible consequence of what has already been normalized beneath the surface of ritual assurance. Okay, it's like this, guys. Here's the deal. You go to church, you worship, I love you, Jesus, I love you, Jesus, I love you, Jesus. You're putting on your show, right? But if you lied to someone to get a car sold, if they said, well, does it go from 0 to 60 in this minute? Yep, it sure does. If you lied, all that worship and pray is a heap of garbage to God. I'm dead serious. These guys, they were showing, just like they've done in the past, they show that they're all holy through their Ash Wednesdays and no bowel movements on Saturdays. And we are so holy. While their leaders are stealing from their own people, God's like, that ain't going to work. So Micah's testimony now turns from dismantling toward promise. And the Ethiopian Tewahedo rendering speaks of a future elevation in which the mountain of the Lord's house is established above the hills, becoming a place to which peoples are drawn. Now, the King James similarly records that in the latter days, that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established in the top of the mountains and exalted above the hills. Now, in both, restoration begins with reorientation rather than reconstruction alone. And basically, it's just somehow Micah decided, I just want to tell you how high God is and who's the one that's really in charge. Basically saying, God is above all. You can't trick him. He knows exactly what's going on. Our sins are going to be dealt with. So the Ethiopian phrasing presents nations moving toward this elevation with intention, suggesting a response that arises from recognition rather than compulsion. Well, the King James echoes the movement by describing many people who come and say that they will go up to the mountain of the Lord. And the gathering is not portrayed as forced submission, but as voluntary approach. So instruction then becomes the focus. The Ethiopian rendering describes teaching that proceeds from Zion, offering direction that restores alignment. Now, the King James, similarly, it states that the law shall go forth from Zion and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. So in both, guidance is presented as the means through which peace becomes possible. So the response among nations is then depicted through transformation. The Ethiopian wording speaks of implements of conflict being reshaped into instruments of cultivation, indicating that former preparation for harm has been redirected toward provision. And the King James preserves the imagery by describing swords beaten into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. Now, the cessation of conflict arises from altered posture rather than imposed silence. And security is described through ordinary dwelling. The Ethiopian rendering portrays individuals sitting without fear, while the King James similarly records that each shall sit under his vine and fig tree, with none to make them afraid. So stability is framed here as the absence of threat rather than the presence of dominion. But both translations, they both acknowledge that peoples may continue to walk according to their own names, yet the covenant community is described as walking in the name of the Lord. So the Ethiopian text leans towards relational fidelity, while the King James maintains the contrast between competing allegiances. Restoration, therefore, includes distinction without any coercion. So this places future peace beside present imbalance, allowing the audience, you guys, to hear how hope is described once alignment is restored. So the elevation of the mountain becomes a symbol of teaching received rather than the power imposed, as nations approach in response to guidance that invites reconciliation. Now, Micah's prophecy now narrows from nations to a single place. The Ethiopian names Bethlehem as the point from which a future ruler will arise, one whose authority is not derived from present institutions. Now, the king, that's Jesus, it basically predicted Jesus. Now, the King James similarly records that out of Bethlehem shall come forth one who is to be ruler in Israel. So in both, expectation is redirected away from existing governance toward an origin that appears small by comparison. Now, the Ethiopian phrasing presents this emergence as rooted in continuity, describing origins that extend beyond immediate history. The King James echoes this by stating that his goings forth have been from of old, from everlasting. Authority is therefore framed not as an innovation, but as fulfillment of what has already been established. And present vulnerability is acknowledged before future stability is described. The Ethiopian rendering speaks of the people being given over until the appointed time of birth, suggesting a period in which protection is not removed but deferred. Then the King James likewise records that they shall be given up until the time that she which travaileth hath brought forth. Waiting becomes part of the testimony. So the gathering of the remnant then follows. The Ethiopian portrays those who remain being brought back to their kin, while the King James similarly states that the remnant of his brethren shall return. Restoration is presented as relational return rather than territorial recovery alone. So the ruler's posture is described through care rather than a command. The Ethiopian rendering depicts standing and feeding in strength derived from the Lord, emphasizing guidance sustained through provision. And the King James preserves this image by stating that he shall stand and feed in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. Well, governance is aligned with shepherding, and security emerges from presence rather than policy here. The Ethiopian phrasing presents dwelling in safety as the result of this guidance, while the King James likewise records that they shall abide, like the dude. So stability is linked to alignment with the one who shepherds rather than to the preservation of prior systems. Thus, peace is then named directly. The Ethiopian rendering identifies this ruler as the source through which peace becomes possible, while the King James states that this man shall be the peace. Now, in both, reconciliation between God and man is grounded in personhood rather than enforcement, as expectation moves from structure toward presence. So really, what we're seeing is the whole point for God to have chosen a people and for God himself, the Father, to dwell with them and teach them, the statutes of being right. It was the whole point of that book was to show that our nature will never submit to him, not our nature. And every single time we turn around, evil will creep in and we'll turn away from God every single time. So that's why God had to send his son as a mediator, as someone to talk to first that can explain God better to us and can represent us to God, but not a king on earth who is capable of being misled, lied to, coerced, blackmailed, just like they did with all the other kings. But this time with the king who is righteous and perfect and is not only the king, but the priest for the Father. So that is what we're learning throughout the Old Testament, that without Jesus, we would never be reconciled with God, ever. Not in this flesh fallen world. So he had to send his son. So Micah now presents what has already been shown rather than what must newly be discovered. The Ethiopian speaks of what is good as something revealed, not hidden, placing responsibility upon recognition rather than access. The King James similarly states that what is good has been declared, indicating that expectation arises from clarity that's already been given. So the requirement is then expressed through action and posture. The Ethiopian wording calls for justice to be done, mercy to be loved, and humility to be walked in the presence of God. And the King James echoes this by instructing that one should do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. But in both, the emphasis rests on movement rather than affirmation, meaning action rather than what you say. So justice is presented as practice rather than opinion. The Ethiopian leans toward equity enacted within daily decisions, while the King James preserves the demand that judgment be lived rather than proclaimed. So the covenant is not maintained through speech alone, but through the ordering of conduct. So mercy is described as affection rather than tolerance, and the Ethiopian suggests a disposition that delights in compassion, while the King James likewise speaks of loving mercy rather than permitting it reluctantly. So care becomes something chosen rather than concealed. And humility is then introduced as relational posture. The Ethiopian portrays walking before God as a sustained orientation, indicating awareness that shapes behavior over time. The King James similarly frames humility as companionship in movement rather than submission within ritual alone. So this requirement is not placed beside offerings, but before them. And the Ethiopian presents posture as preceding presentation, while the King James likewise positions humility as the condition through which alignment is maintained. Worship without justice remains incomplete. So the segment, this really centers responsibility within what has already been revealed. The comparison allows you guys to hear whether humility is rendered as compliance with expectation or as the lived awareness that accompanies relationship with God. So Micah's testimony now turns toward the visible consequences that follow sustained imbalance. The Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox rendering speaks of a city filled with violence and deceit, where wealth has been gathered through distortion rather than stewardship. America. The King James similarly describes a place in which treasures of wickedness remain within the house of the wicked, and measures are made small for gain. Nothing new under the sun here, folks. Well, in both, acquisition is presented as having been detached from equity. So false balance becomes the focal point. The Ethiopian wording portrays scales adjusted to favor advantage, suggesting that exchanges itself has been altered. The King James preserves this image too by asking whether one could count those pure who use deceitful weights and bags of false measures. So integrity within commerce is shown to have eroded before the land itself begins to respond. So speech is also addressed. Oh, and let me take a step back. Scales. Back then, they would cheat by giving the illusion that the scale is correct by giving you two things. Here's the gold, here's the silver, and or whatever. And then they would weigh self. They would cheat with scales, just like they cheat with CBDC, printing money, and all that stuff. Okay? What I'm saying is, this is all the same thing that America is doing. And what the Lord is saying is that this isn't going to last forever, because we're now the children of God. So once the people hold the leaders accountable, and basically that's them just going online and just calling them out for being Satanist and completely, saying, showing documentation and proving that our own government is just wicked as hell. That's where the evidence of the fruits of the people who are standing up to them. It's not about, you don't have to go to President Trump and say, we the people demand that you cease and desist. That's not how it works. We will show by our action, and our action has already started. So what we're seeing is, what's going to happen is, just like through all of prophecy and all of that's what's happened to Israel, we're not going to be able to continue stealing, killing, and destroying until God intervenes. But before he intervenes, he's going to, he must do the just thing. And the just thing is basically exposing all of those leaders, taking them down. And, with that comes consequences for the people themselves. But the consequences and all of that, we've been learning through the Old Testament, that the consequences come later, much later. So speech is also addressed. The Ethiopian rendering describes inhabitants whose tongues move in deception, lies. While the King James similarly records that the rich speak lies and that their tongue is deceitful in their mouth. Epstein. So harm has not remained confined to transaction. It has entered communication. And consequences then introduced through physical condition. The Ethiopian phrasing speaks of sickness permitted to settle in, portraying a weakening that reflects what has been practiced. The King James echoes this by stating that smiting will bring desolation, and aligning bodily distress with the posture already maintained within society. So provision begins to diminish. Provision begins to diminish. Kind of like right now, your grocery stores. You used to go in there and there used to be, 70 different types of brands you could choose from. Now it's just between two. Provision is being diminished here. This is the cost of us allowing the leaders to do what they do without, us stepping up and exposing evil. So the Ethiopian rendering describes sowing without reaping and pressing without retaining, indicating effort that yields no stability. The King James similarly records that one shall eat but not be satisfied, and sow but not reap. So the loss is not imposed suddenly, it matures through continued imbalance. And agriculture imagery then follows. The Ethiopian text speaks of olives that cannot be anointed and grapes that do not produce drink, while the King James likewise states that one shall tread olives but not anoint with oil, and tread grapes but not to drink wine. So the land mirrors the conduct sustained upon it, just like our land right now. Our land is just completely saturated with chemicals, through agricultural modern farming, which has ruined our soil. And when you don't have vegetation to drop and lay, and just, if you don't leave it alone, because the Bible says it takes 7 years for that soil to go back to normal, even with chemicals in it. Well, that farmers don't just let a field sit there for 7 years. And that's not on us. It's just they don't read their Bibles. Some farmers do, but that's why they don't get greedy and do their entire farm and then live off of their entire farm. They would just split it in half and then do only one side and live under the provision of that. But no, we got to hire and grow. Well, God isn't asking us to be the leader of all agriculture in that area. He's asking us to use wisdom. And wisdom is knowing that the Bible has talked about 7 years of leaving something alone for 7 years. So the land mirrors the conduct sustained upon it, just like America. Now, this presents environmental decline as aligned with social posture. The comparison allows you guys to hear whether the withering provision is described as curse pronounced from above or as the permitted unfolding of practices already normalized within the community. So Micah's testimony now turns from public structures to private bonds. The Ethiopian Tewahedo rendering speaks of confidence becoming unsafe even among companions, portraying a condition in which trust no longer rests securely within familiar relationships. Now, the King James similarly warns against placing confidence in a friend or guide, indicating that fracture has entered the ordinary patterns of reliance. Now, guarded speech becomes necessary. The Ethiopian wording describes caution even in the presence of one who shares the household, suggesting that intimacy itself has been affected by the imbalance sustained in the wider community. The King James echoes this by advising that the doors of the mouth be kept even from one who lies within the same embrace. So the sphere of safety begins to contract. Now, family structure is then addressed directly, something that we don't have very well here. So the Ethiopian rendering portrays division arising between generations, where son moves against father and daughter against mother. And the King James preserves this testimony by describing the same inversion within the home, presenting loyalty as unsettled by the posture that has taken root beyond its walls. So they start, the kids started to dye their hairs, getting earrings, tattoos, and honoring the mother and the father. One of the simple 10 commandments seemed to die. So the household becomes a reflection of public practice. The Ethiopian phrasing leans toward the idea that injustice maintained in policy eventually alters personal expectation. Now, the King James likewise presents social disintegration as extended into the most immediate bonds, where alliances that once provided stability now mirror broader imbalance. Thus, opposition is described as arising from within rather than without, in their hearts. And the Ethiopian rendering portrays adversaries emerging from among one's own, while the King James similarly records that a man's enemies are those of his own house. Kind of like now on Thanksgiving, when you get together and everyone wants to talk about blue China, blue state China, and red state Orsini. That is divide and conquer. So the erosion of trust is no longer limited to strangers here. And despite this, orientation remains possible. The Ethiopian text speaks of looking toward the Lord as the source of hearing. Now, while the King James likewise states that one will look unto the Lord and wait for the God of salvation, but attention shifts from similar support toward divine response. So this presents relational fracture as the maturation of imbalance already practiced elsewhere. And the comparison allows the audience, you guys, to hear whether the erosion of trust is framed as imposed disruption or as the permitted consequence of posture sustained within the community. Now, Micah's testimony concludes by turning toward preservation within collapse. The Ethiopian, it speaks of rejoicing not over the fall of the ones who trust in the Lord, portraying restoration as arising after a season of darkness. The King James It similarly records that though one has fallen, rising shall follow. And though one sits in darkness, the Lord shall be a light. In both, recovery is presented as relational rather than circumstantial. So acknowledgement of consequence precedes renewal. The Ethiopian wording describes bearing the indignation of the Lord until one's cause is pleaded, suggesting endurance within correction. The King James echoes this by stating that one will bear the indignation of the Lord because of sin committed, until judgment is brought forth into the light. Thus, restoration begins with recognition rather than avoidance. So vindication here is then introduced as the act of divine advocacy. The Ethiopian rendering portrays the Lord bringing forth justice on behalf of the one who waits, while the King James similarly speaks of God executing judgment and leading into light. Deliverance is described as proceeding from relationship rather than strategy. So public perception then shifts as a renewal takes form. The Ethiopian speaks of those who once questioned, now witnessing the restoration that follows humility. When the King James records that the adversary shall see and be covered with shame, the outcome becomes visible beyond the remnant itself. So again, the King James and the Ethiopian, they complement each other. They really do. They calm you down from an angry God, and they settle you into what's really happening. And that's by bringing two languages into one, and I think that's a good thing, right? Because we're bringing in Latin from Old to Americ, or Latin to Ge'ez, Latin to Greek, Hebrew, Greek, Latin to Old English, and the other is Hebrew, Greek, Ge'ez to Americ to modern English. But both renderings really do complement each other. Now, shepherding language in Micah returns to the forefront. Shepherding, okay? This is where Jesus appears. Not appears, but the prophesying of Jesus coming. The Ethiopian rendering calls for the people to be guided with the staff of care, dwelling in places of provision as in former days. The King James likewise records the plea for the Lord to feed his people with his rod in the heritage set apart. Governance is again aligned with guidance and remembrance of past wonders, remembrance of past wonders, okay? Because they have a record of things that happened in the past, and they believe it happened. It's just that leadership always, gets corrupted from non-believers who come in and make deals and believers who come in whose hearts have changed towards the devil instead of God. Now, the Ethiopian text speaks of acts performed in the days of departure being shown once more, while the King James similarly refers to marvelous things revealed as in the days of coming out of the land of Egypt. So renewal is grounded in continuity. And the testimony actually closes with forgiveness. The Ethiopian rendering portrays transgression being passed over for the sake of inheritance preserved, while the King James likewise asks, "Who is a God like unto thee that pardons iniquity and passes by transgression?" So mercy becomes the final posture extended. Once again, the people repent, God forgives, everything's okay. Now, this segment presents the remnant as sustained not by exemption, but by guidance. And the comparison allows you guys to hear whether restoration is framed as policy enacted from above or presence extended to those who wait in alignment. See, did God do anything? No, it was the people who turned around and said, "We're not reading our word anymore, and we're following wicked orders, and we're not going to get anywhere if we continue down this path." And then they again And this happens over and over and over. It's like they just can't stop this loop. So to conclude, and Micah's a very short book, Micah's testimony holds accusation and restoration together without dissolving either. The Ethiopian and King James, they each present a people who continue outward observance while permitting imbalance to settle beneath their institutions, commerce, and households. Leadership consumes what it was meant to protect. Mediation adjusts itself according to provision. Confidence is declared publicly even as equity is withdrawn privately. So the controversy that opens the prophecy does not introduce new expectations. It recalls what has already been shown. Justice, mercy, and humility are not presented as hidden requirements, but as posture that was known before imbalance matured into consequence. The silence that follows, compromised leadership and purchased prophecy appears not as indifference, but as the lifting of covering once alignment is refused. This is like saying, if you lie, cheat, steal, kill, destroy, to get your way, to get to the top, to follow the Joneses, to be at the top of your pedestal, to be liked, to be wanted, to be needed by public, all of that is going to lead to your downfall. If you turn to Jesus, none of that will happen, the downfall. And you will stop stealing, killing, destroying, and doing exactly what the devil wants. Anything opposite of the 10 Commandments, anything opposite of what Jesus taught. So the dismantling of structure and the withering of provision are therefore placed beside the practices that preceded them. To them at that time through Micah, they understood, they're like, again, we messed up. And the land reflects what has been normalized upon it. We can look at the same with America. Trust erodes within the household as public posture enters private bond. Yet within this exposure, preservation is named. A remnant remains. A ruler arises from Bethlehem whose governance is expressed through shepherding rather than extraction. Micah is a great book because it predicts Jesus coming, and it teaches us yet again, if we turn back to God, our land will get better, more rain will follow, stop worshiping Baal and Moloch, stop killing people. I mean, that's really what it says. So forgiveness concludes what judgment has uncovered. Transgression is passed over for the sake of inheritance preserved. Restoration is extended not through exemption from consequence, but through guidance offered after recognition. So the comparison between both canons, it allows you guys to hear whether divine response is described as imposed penalty or as the permitted unfolding of what has already been chosen beneath the surface of ritual assurance. This has been Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Conner. Tune in tomorrow night when God gives me another revelation to tell you guys all about. God keep you. God thank you. And God give you much peace at your home. Chill out. Everything's going to be all right. It's the leaders that need to worry because they're the ones that are going to suffer the consequences. Even though they think they're getting away with it, they eat their own. All right, guys. Love you, and I'll be on TikTok here shortly. God bless, and see you tomorrow.
This has been Cause Before Symptom with your host, James Carner. Go to his website, jamescarner.com, and sign up for his newsletter. Also, download his free books on the breath war, the crown of blood, and the ritual machine. Fix your body by buying his award-winning detox formula, removing heavy metals and parasites. You'll feel better and live longer. Go to ElitePotion.com. And one more thing, please. Just try and love your neighbor, because if you do, the world would be a better place. See you tomorrow.